pressure control. So yesterday we talked about pressure control, and we talked about how it is the principles of pressure control, the indications for pressure control, and we also talked about the literature. Let's compare. Today we're just going to talk about one thing, which is basically why pressure control is better than volume control in hypoxia, and we'll talk about some myths of pressure control and stuff like that. So let's start with the myths of pressure control. Just to repeat a little bit, just to remind everybody, there is the pressure control set parameters are inspiratory pressure, PEEP, respiratory rate, I time, and FiO2. And dependent parameters are, we have tidal volume, mean airway pressure, I to E ratio, and respiratory rate. We also talked about the volume control. Just also reminder, set parameters, tidal volume, respiratory rate, FiO2, and P. So, some myths of pressure control, people just don't understand pressure control very well. So for example, somebody comes and tells me, I have a patient on pressure control, what's the settings? Settings are tidal volume, so-and-so, respiratory rate, so-and-so. Did I mention tidal volume here? No. Did I mention tidal volume here? That means that you shouldn't mention tidal volume as a set parameter. If this is the first thing you're telling me, that means you know nothing about pressure control, right? Pressure control is supposed to start, you tell me the set parameters, and if you want to say the tidal volume, you say that results in a tidal volume of such and such, and maybe mean airway pressure of such and such. That's number one. Number two, you get somebody tell me, I put the patient on pressure control, inspiratory pressure of 25, PEEP of 10, peak airway pressure of 35, plateau pressure of 35. Did I mention peak or plateau here? No. Did I mention peak and plateau here? No. So you should not say peak and plateau at all. Never say peak and plateau in any pressure-driven modes, because because it is implied that the peak and the peak plus plateau equal. I'm sorry, the inspiratory pressure plus PEEP equal peak and equal the plateau. Right, so it's implied. I can calculate 25 plus 10 equals 35. It's not, I don't like math, but I like math. Right, it's easy. Next is when people say pressure control requires more sedation than volume control. This is a fallacy. This is false. It all depends on the I to E ratio. So if your I to E ratio is 1 to 2, 1 to 3, 1 to 4, anything like 1 to 5, all of these are all physiologic, and you will be able to give the patient the same amount of sedation as volume control and no problem. If the I to E ratio starts to become 1 to 1, then the patient might require a little bit more of sedation, and if the I to E ratio of more than volume control, if the I to E ratio is inversed, 1.5 to 1 or 2 to 1 or anything like that, that requires paralysis. Right, so the I to E ratio is very, very important to determine stuff. Okay, next, I ask people, somebody tells me, I switched the patient from volume control to pressure control for hypoxia. Switching for hypoxia, so I asked, what's the I to E ratio, or what's the I time? And he tells me, oh, I don't know, I left it for the respiratory therapist. Or I don't know, he said set the settings and they will take care of the I time. The only reason you're switching from volume control to pressure control is to play with the I time, especially in cases of hypoxia. Right? If you're switching for the two other indications, the air hunger or the what's the other indication? Air hunger and high peak airway pressure. You can switch to whatever you want. 1 to 2, 1 to 3. I don't care what the I to E ratio at that time, right? But if you're switching for hypoxia, you're switching for the I time. So you have to tell the I time. Sometimes if I want to just like be quick and let the respiratory therapist, or when I trust the respiratory therapist to do whatever they want, I just say, give you 1-to-1 eye to ear ratio and do the rest. That's more important than anything in cases of hypoxia, right? And then what else is a myth of pressure control? It's not really a myth, but it's something that's like kind of an idiosyncrasy for us. When we order, or a rule that we made is basically we order this, and this. We don't order the eye time. So that's the only mode of ventilation that we order. You ordered this before, right? Here, when you're here, when we order this, we order the dependent parameters. Usually we order set parameters. We never order dependent parameters except in this mode, right? And the dependent parameters, that's for safety, because you're saying to the respiratory therapist, I want the patient to be 1-to-1 eye to ear ratio, right? Do whatever it takes to keep the patient at 1-to-1 eye to ear ratio. Why? Because we don't know. We're not there all the time, right? So if the patient is breathing at 20, the machine itself doesn't have a button that says eye to ear ratio. It has a button that says eye time. So the respiratory therapist can only adjust the eye time. So when I say 20, 1-to-1 eye to ear ratio, or 1.5, let's say I want to do 1-to-1 eye to ear ratio. So I calculated myself. I say 60 divided by 20. They give you 3 seconds per breath. So I want 1-to-1, so I'm going to give 1.5 time eye time, 1.5 seconds eye time. Okay, great. So the respiratory therapist goes on and dial it as such. If the patient goes to 30, breathes at 30, what's going to happen? He now has 2 seconds per breath. 1.5 of them will remain eye time, and only half will be for the E time. So the patient will have auto pee, pop his lung, get discoordinated with the vent, and get very mad at you, right? So that's why we order eye to ear ratio. So the respiratory therapist visits the vent, checks the vents for every 4 hours, or PRN, and whenever he finds that the patient is breathing faster, he can calculate again and say, we'll make the eye time 1 second. Or he find the patient breathing slower, then he says, okay, we'll prolong the eye time, and he keep changing the eye time. Okay, but that's for safety. All right, and that is it. 1 second.